Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
This week on To the Contrary, a new daily first weight loss pill similar to Ozempic is approved in the U.S. And AI slop. What is that? And how it's affecting people of all ages. Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from a variety of perspectives. Up first, weight loss. A new daily weight loss pill is now an option in the U.S. It can help people lose significant amounts of weight and may lower heart risks when used with diet and exercise. It curbs appetite and has shown similar weight loss results to other GLP-1 drugs, such as Ozempic, in trials. Many people prefer it to injections because it's easier to take and often cheaper. Joining me this week are feminist activist Erin Matson, Washington Examiner investigations editor Sarah Bedford, and Democratic commentator Na'ilah Amaru. So the first question goes to Erin, and that is this a good development for women's health?
What I'm concerned about is that we are in a new era of heroin chic for women.
I am concerned about the reliance on weight loss pills or injections, but I am excited about the accessibility for more everyday people who may not have been able to afford these types of treatments before.
Things that seem too good to be true usually are, and I wonder what the knock-on effects of creating an easy button for getting thin will be to society and health in the medical community a few years down the road.
Well, if I may jump in, I think the main button, if you will, to be pushed here is all the side effects, which make people, first of all, it doesn't work for everybody. One of my closest friends tried one of them and had to go off it because he wasn't losing weight. Second, there are symptoms like people can't sleep, especially older people who have sleep problems already are made worse by going on some of these, what they call semaglutides. And they get sick to their stomach. They have all kinds of problems. So it's not what one would say is a cruelty-free kind of way to lose weight. And it's expensive. And unless Donald Trump actually succeeds on one of his promises, it's going to be too expensive for the vast majority of Americans. So your thoughts, Na'ilah, on whether this is a cure-all?
So I think that, any pill or any injection is not going to be a panacea for everybody because we all have our own health histories and own body chemistries that react to different treatments in different ways. As I said before, what I am excited about is the scalability and affordability if people should choose to want to use this as a treatment. But as Erin mentioned before, I do think there is a concern that we should have overall as a society about why is there so much emphasis on the need to be thin to lose weight specifically versus trying to be healthy. And so I think that there's a really important nuance, particularly through a gender lens, as we think about what type of treatments healthcare should be accessible for us, particularly as women, as we go through different stages in life and our body changes, our chemistry reacts to medications in different ways, oftentimes which is not studied in many different ways. But overall, I always welcome healthcare breakthroughs that offer healthcare access in scale, just through the lens of affordability. But again, I do want to be mindful and very cautious of the need to be thin and to be skinny, and why the focus is always on weight loss as opposed to being healthy.
Well, Erin, let me ask you this. Trump has made a whole lot of promises or just tossed things out like he's going to make it happen, and they never happen. They go away, and that's the end of that. What about making semaglutide accessible financially for everybody in America? Is that just another one of his, I'll wave my magic wand and make this happen?
Well, the magic wand doesn't seem to work very well. So we'll see what happens and how that plays out. Now, there is an issue about medication affordability across the board in this country. Healthcare, I consider healthcare a human right. Everyone should have access to the healthcare they need. And if you, in concert with your doctor, determine that a GLP-1 medication pill, or for that matter, the injection, is the best way to support your health outcomes, then far be it from me not for you to want to have that. But I do want to go back to what Na'ilah referred to, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. We are in a moment right now for women, a cultural moment for women, where there is intense pressure on body standards and sizes. I have fought for this tooth and nail with my life. I nearly died of anorexia when I was in high school and early college. That is what informed why I became a feminist activist. And I've watched with serious alarm. If you look at, and I'm not going to call people out by name because I believe that they're suffering and struggling. But if you look at what's happening right now in Hollywood and women with the public eye, there are clearly people who are very, very ill. And there is a standard that appears to be happening right now that is reminiscent of the mid-90s, when, folks like Kate Moss and others were in fashion. So I worry deeply about these drugs and how they are impacting that, laid against the overlay of the fact that AI and images are being touched up, laid up an overlay. Even here, I'm going to name check Marjorie Taylor Greene, which I never thought would occur on this show or anywhere in my life. But recently, talking to the New York Times about her concern, one of the things she said was kind of the MAGA look and the extreme pressure on women right now to have a great deal of plastic surgery and to sexualize themselves. We are just in a very combustible era right now for women. And so when these drugs become more available, I'm worried about people who are sick and hurting, feeling pressured to take them.
Sarah, do you think there's more pressure from the left or the right, or is this just a completely nonpartisan issue with no variables leaning toward either side?
Yeah, I don't really see this through a partisan lens. I mean, all women want to be perceived as beautiful in society. And Erin's totally right. A knock-on consequence of the proliferation of GLP-1s is that it sort of ended the body positivity movement. You actually don't need to love yourself. There's a pill for that. We'll take care of it. And so I don't know that was necessarily the intention of people who push GLP-1s and the sort of aesthetic that it can create. But Donald Trump calls it the fat shot, right, when he's talking about it. And a lot of people are just using this for cosmetic purposes and sort of as a shortcut for the hard work and discipline that it used to take someone to get a hot bod. And we don't know what the long-term side effects will be of someone who loses all their muscle mass and loses their ability to self-regulate their diet and things like that if they are able to access an affordable shortcut in the short term. And that is something that, should concern folks.
But, you talk about, several of you have talked about so far in this program, just about the fact that now we're going to get away from judging people on looks. Actually, the lower they make the weight requirements, for example, for heart health, for lung health, the healthier they find Americans are getting. So that what was acceptable 10 years ago is no longer acceptable now. It's too high. Even though they lowered it 10 years ago, they're going to lower it again. That just happened to me. And so they seem to be adjusting based on these new drugs. And is that a good thing? Na'ilah?
Well, I think it's never a good thing when we are depending on medications to create new floors or new ceilings, right? Because then you're creating a system that rewards the use of these types of medications as opposed to maintaining a healthy diet and a healthy daily exercise routine, whatever it may be. But I also think it's an important point when we're talking about the impact of healthcare coverage of if you tend to be overweight, how it costs, right? It costs us. And so there is an incentive to look for an easier, quick way to try and get back to this socially acceptable ideal weight which I would also say, as someone who's in the military, was always classified as being overweight because my body's built differently, right? But I did a lot of running and I did a lot of push-ups. And so I do think that there are certainly issues within how society and the medical community defines who is healthy and who is not, based off of something as specific as numbers, which do not necessarily tell the accurate story of someone's overall health.
Sarah, what about the fact that they keep changing these numbers? I mentioned it earlier, but I was judged by my doctor to be not diabetic, but pre-diabetic. And I had to bring my numbers way down, which I did. But they keep, again, that's an area I was referring to. It used to be, okay, if your numbers were up to, I'm just guessing here now, 110. Now they want you below 100. I went on one of those semi-glutides, and I got my number down to 69. And he said, oh, that's terrific. And I thought, what are you going to want next week? 0? How are people supposed to deal with these constantly changing standards of health?
As long as those standards are informed by science and a better understanding in the medical community of what unhealthy versus healthy looks like, that seems like a good thing, I suppose, maybe to let the science evolve where it needs to. But when you're adjusting threshold levels about what fitness looks like in the military, what's considered overweight, to address sort of cosmetic sensitivities or to fit what's in vogue in society, that's where you sort of run into trouble when you're starting to politicize the health industry to sort of fit what's shifting in society or culture. And so that is perhaps another fear with widespread GLP-1 use, but it really depends on why those numbers are shifting.
Well, are we encouraging people to try to drive their numbers too low? Is there ever going to be a reaction saying, oh, well, yeah, we wanted to get them below 100, but we didn't want to get it to 50?
Well, I think one problem with the GLP-1s is that a lot of people aren't using them to get their numbers out of a pre-diabetic zone, right? A lot of the cases that we're seeing, why it's becoming such a profitable area for pharmaceutical companies, is that most people who are new users of semaglutides are using it for cosmetic reasons. And while it is just objectively true that when you are thinner, your heart has to work less hard, and technically there's a correlation between heart health and losing weight, you can take it too far quite easily. And so there are a lot of issues that, when this is presented as a fix-all, you start to stigmatize people who are still overweight, who might not be able to afford them, or who for whatever reason don't want to try GLP-1s. And you also always have people who will be chasing the extreme end of the aesthetic that's in vogue. And that is obviously unhealthy.
Na'ilah, I wonder, with communities of color, is it as confusing, more confusing, less confusing to see these numbers going up and down, sideways and backwards?
Well, I can speak for myself, and having worked, having lived and come from, different communities of color. There are a lot of things that impact what we associate as healthy and how our bodies are built. I do remember an experience in the military it was the size of my hips that put me into the overweight category, because they tape you, right? And so my hips are bigger, and so the number does not work in my favor, and so that automatically triggers a red flag for me to be tested for my measurement of fat. And so when we're talking about how different communities and groups of people, how we're built, what type of foods we eat, what we think of as healthy. In my immediate family, no one has considered me overweight. But when I was in the military, it was like, oh, you're going to go on the fat plan, because I was like, 1 or 2 pounds overweight. And I have never been, I would say the weight that I had to maintain in the military was not a healthy weight for me. And so I had to starve myself and dehydrate myself in order to maintain a very arbitrary number in order to, be able to go into basic training, maintain, so on and so forth. But I do think it's different, right? Not everyone is built like Barbie, right? And that's okay. But that doesn't mean that because we're not built like a Barbie does not mean that we are unhealthy. And I would also argue that Barbie herself is not healthy. So I think that there are levels in terms of how people are built, the types of food, what we associate as being healthy. There's definitely a cultural aspect to that. And that definitely oftentimes is in conflict with the medical community's definition of healthy.
And on the note of Barbie, I'd like to say, there's some who have said that if Barbie were a human being, the Barbie doll, that she would actually have to crawl on all fours because of the proportions are so out of whack. And Bonnie, you've been talking about numbers, and I really appreciate, Na'ilah, sharing your story about what was happening in the military. I mean, one of the pieces, another backdrop to this too, is that women, our bodies are inherently meant to carry a higher body fat percentage. And yet the entire medical system is built upon the male body. There is a long-standing multi-decade issue of medical research being primarily conducted on men. And so what happens is that our bodies, which are perfectly healthy, right? Maybe perfectly healthy, are being judged by male standards, in part because women haven't been the focus of the studies and the sample sizes. And so that's one of the things that happens with these turbulent numbers that you're getting at the doctor, where they're like, oh, now go do this, now go do this, or suggesting that women don't meet a certain standard. And then just the last thing that I'd like to make sure is part of this conversation is that there is a robust movement that calls itself a fat acceptance movement. That's their words, not mine. And they make the argument that a number of the things that are being discussed regarding weight are actually related to other health issues and that it is possible to have health on a number of metrics, even with more weight. Now, again, I'm not going to stand in between any individual and their doctor figuring out what is right for them. But I think we do need to consider how much anti-fat bias exists in the society and how often weight is used as a stand-in to talk about other metrics of health that we might be better served talking about with more specificity.
Interesting thought. Why don't you all let us know what you think? Follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Bay. From health news to tech news, AI-generated content, or AI slop, as some call it, has become a major part of what people see online. It shows up heavily in short-form video feeds, social media, even children's publishing. Some of it is quick, cheap, and repetitive, and it spreads easily through recommendations and algorithms. At the same time, tech companies are pushing AI as a serious long-term tool and trying to shift attention from novelty to practical use. Different generations are responding in different ways, from children who like the fast-moving images and endless catchphrases, to older people who respond to sentimental and entertaining videos and pictures. As AI becomes more common, questions about quality, creativity, and how it shapes culture are becoming harder to ignore. So, Na'ilah, what do you say about AI slop? Is it a serious concern?
I think that it's an interesting phenomenon because I, like many folks, like to scroll through YouTube, and I used to get an algorithm that, speaking of algorithms, that would suggest photo or suggest videos that were of interest to me, things that were along like, minimalism, cleaning, how to be a better person, personal development. And as of late, I have gotten really random videos that when I watch them and don't scroll past them, I feel like I have lost several brain cells. But it's very interesting to me because they've been fairly consistent, which tells me people are watching them in their entirety and then looking for more. Because when they pop up to me, I look at it and then I swipe to the next one because I don't want to see it. But it's interesting because there's not necessarily a relationship between the content that I see in those videos and the history of what type of videos I'm typically used to watching. Like animals, puppies, kittens, things that are interesting to me. There is not necessarily a relationship between the AI that is now being prompted to the top of my algorithm.
So Sarah, what's the answer? Should there be more stringent regulation of AI and what goes in it? Or is that just another way of censoring things that some people don't like.
I actually think the market is going to respond pretty strongly to this one, because I am certainly not alone in wanting that off my feed. I don't want to look at it. And a lot of people don't want to look at AI slop. AI is great for a lot of things, researching, meal planning. It's not great for entertainment. People don't want to see AI generated actors. They don't want to see AI generated content in their feeds. And so the first sort of social media company that can on their own figure out how to filter out that type of content or build a platform where you're only seeing authentic images and videos is probably going to perform really well in the marketplace. So regulation on just this specific area of AI content creation might not even be necessary, because they're, take my money if you figure out how to get this off of my feeds, right?
Anybody else want to jump in on that point before we transition to another?
Yeah, I'll just say that I just completed a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I desperately want the fact that thank you. I desperately want the fact that we as humans in these weird bodies that do all these weird things, like I want that to matter for some reason. I don't want it to just be a computer that makes up things and that's the role of art, is to just be generated by a computer. And I think Sarah's absolutely right. I mean, people don't want to see this junk. It's absolutely absurd. And I will say, as a parent, another thing that I've noticed before with my own daughter is on YouTube, there's already, even before this slop got so all over the place, and it really is just disgusting stuff that makes you feel horrible after you see it, because it's just kind of mindless, keeping your brain there, keeping you engaged. But there's a pre-existing issue with YouTube continues to serve people more and more extreme content. And so my own daughter was watching these videos that she loved about toys. And then all of a sudden, here we see, like my husband and I see that she's watching on the iPad, and it's like Barbie's like barfing up green stuff. And it felt like violent and weird. And so adding AI into this mix, like it's the last thing I want. And I imagine the last thing a number of parents want is this kind of stuff being served up to their kids.
And that's a really tough one when it comes to crossing the line between what's good for kids, what's good for young people, what's good for people generally, and censorship.
You see a number of laws at the state level, even at the federal level, moving to deal with shielding children from access to certain social media platforms and certain types of content. And the big tech companies and lobbyists certainly do try to portray that as a form of censorship. But there's a real demand for that type of regulation, at least for minor children. And so, I think those laws are only going to grow in popularity, even though they're often portrayed as censorship.
Is AI slop, does that include clearly useless media, such as pornography, such as things that don't teach anybody anything and just prey on people's psychological weaknesses?
I don't necessarily know. I think that, Aaron made a really good point earlier in terms of, why we're drawn to the videos that we are. I subscribe to my channels because I find them interesting, whether it's a storyline or I'm learning something from them. But from the AI slop that is pushed to the top of my algorithm, it doesn't feed me in any way, right? I don't walk away from those videos asking a deeper question about life or having learned some interesting fact, which is typically how, this may just be individual consumer behavior, but that's why I watch the videos that I watch, because I find it entertaining in some way to me in a very personal way. And again, for me, that is, I've learned something interesting, or I felt good for 2 or 3 minutes watching puppies in a basket. I don't get that from AI, right? I don't see a storyline. I don't feel a connection. And perhaps, as Sarah mentioned, that the market will control, the direction and exhaustion of AI, and whether it remains at slop or whether it has the potential to evolve into something more substantive.
And one last question on this topic. We've talked about how some of this stuff is bad for children. Some of it may also be bad for seniors, who knows? But what should be done to police it, if anything? Should there be a department of AI monitoring set up?
I don't know if necessarily a department that polices is going to necessarily solve the issue, because I think that it also reflects a broader issue, which is consumer literacy, right? If it wasn't AI before, it was fake news or deep fake news in the form of videos or publications online that didn't come from verified sources. And so I think, while regulation in a department that monitors can certainly be helpful, I think the broader issue is really preparing people on how to be critical consumers of information, whether that is AI slop or whether that's taking a blog on a website somewhere as an actual fact-based resource to use to better understand an issue.
And since there is no central authority governing AI, we will be here watching for you, and we will do our best to put our thumbs up or point our fingers, whichever, when we see something that we think is more not good for people than good for people. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Keep the conversation going on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok. Reach out to us at To the Contrary. Visit our website. The address is on the screen. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
You're watching PBS.